Florida falls to Tennessee. No moral victories in Gators' 5-point loss to the Vols. Next on Read and Reaction, the articles. Hey, everybody. This is Will Miles with Read and Reaction. Thanks for joining me here. Again, just wanted to remind anybody who's new to the site that you can get the digital text versions of these articles over at readandreaction.com, that some of the people who read those articles had asked us to take our articles and put them in audio form. And so that's what we're doing here with these Read and Reaction, the articles series, is these are things you can read if you want, but they're also things that you can listen to here on YouTube and get that as well. If you like what we're doing here, certainly like, subscribe, hit that bell button. That helps us with the algorithm overall, lets you know when these things drop, because they don't usually drop about the exact same time as the article, especially after a game. This article got finished around 4 a.m. last night, which means that I'm just now getting around to getting it recorded. The other thing is, if you want to support us, if you like this content, you want more of it, you can go over to patreon.com/read and reaction, support us over there. We do some extra stuff for the people who are Patreon followers, but also we're going to have some stuff coming up here towards the December timeframe that will be free to those people who are on Patreon. And then obviously we had the Read and Reaction preview magazine that was Florida Gator specific. We'll be doing that thing. I think that's going to be an annual thing for us. And so folks on Patreon get early access and free access to that as well. So if you want to support us over there, that's great. If not, then hey, we appreciate you being here, appreciate you listening, appreciate you reading, and let's get right to it. Florida falls to Tennessee. Florida lost by 5 to Tennessee in Knoxville, 38-33. Considering the Gators came in as 10.5-point underdogs, they did exceed expectations. Of course, there are no moral victories in college football. Florida now stands at 2-2 and 0-2 in the SEC. For all intents and purposes, the Gators have been eliminated from contention in the SEC East. That means there are still goals for the 2022 season to pursue, but the big ones are over just 4 games into the season. But we learned a lot about this Florida team in the 60 minutes in Knoxville. We learned that this team isn't going to give up regardless of the circumstances. We learned that the defense is in need of a major overhaul. And we learned that Anthony Richardson may just be the quarterback that we thought he was coming into the season, at least at times. You'd much rather learn all of those things in a win, but that isn't the case here. So the Gators are left licking their wounds, having a hopefully easier time with Eastern Washington next week, and getting ready to pursue a bowl appearance because those practices are going to be important for next year's squad. That's what's left after this loss to Tennessee. The Vols went 7-6 last year, found out who their quarterback is, and got situated with their new head coach's system last season. This year, they're 4-0. Florida is positioned to do the same if they stay the course and keep working, or they can let this loss snowball, similarly to the birthday present the Hurricanes gave Mario Cristobal in a 45-31 shellacking from Middle Tennessee after falling flat against Texas A&M last week. It's time to get to work. Napier's decision-making. The most popular topic on my Twitter feed after the game was Billy Napier's decision-making when it came to going for 2-point conversions on the last 2 touchdowns. But I'm not sure evaluating those decisions makes much sense without evaluating his overall decision-making game plan. Napier clearly believed his defense couldn't stop Tennessee. That's why he went for 4th down on 6 separate occasions, including twice in his own territory. If we look at those decisions in aggregate using college football's 4th down bot, here's how those decisions rated along with 2 other 4th down decisions where he didn't go for it. Note that the bot didn't rate the Johnson run for a touchdown at the end of the game, presumably because the winning percentage gained was so small either way that it didn't think it was worth posting. Regardless, even if we take that one out of the equation, Napier made the right call in just about every case. The only one to quibble with is his decision to kick the 50-yard field goal, though that's considered a toss-up by the bot. In aggregate, Napier raised Florida's chances of winning 13.3% just by making the correct fourth down decisions according to this model. I have some quibbles with this particular model, but I think it does a good job of suggesting that Napier was making the right calls, even when it seemed like those calls might be risky. They weren't risky. They were the right thing to do given the game and yardage situations. So, what about the 2-pointers? Were those the right decisions analytically? I have to admit that I texted good buddy Nick Knudsen about it as it was happening, and luckily he was watching the game with an actuary who could explain it to us dullards, and I think I agree with his assessment. Down 17 points, Florida needed 2 touchdowns, 2 extra points, and a field goal to tie the game. But even if they were able to get that, the Florida defense couldn't stop Tennessee when they were trying to score. So what kind of disadvantage does that give you in overtime? 70-30? 60-40? So what are the odds of converting a 2-point conversion? Well, we have that data, and it's somewhere between 40 to 50% historically. So let's peg that at 45% for this exercise. Now let's say that Napier hits the 2-pointer on the first try, and a zipper or not tip the ball short of catches it for that conversion. Well, that means Florida is only a touchdown, extra point, and field goal away from a win. So essentially, Napier took a shot that he could win the game right there, rather than relying on a tie, getting him into overtime where his odds were worse. But let's take that even further. Even though Napier was going for the win right there, he also left himself an out with the second 2-point conversion if he failed. That puts the odds even more in favor of going for it twice. And even with that second failure, Florida still got the ball back with a chance to heave it into the end zone. We laud coaches who go for 2-pointers at the end of games when they're down by 1 point as going for the win. That's all Napier did here. Had the Gators kicked the extra point after the first touchdown, then gotten a field goal, then followed that up with a touchdown to get within 1, nobody would have questioned him going for 2 points for the win. So if just modifying the order of events changes our opinion, that probably means that the math says our opinion is wrong. Defensive struggles. All of Napier's decision-making was predicated on his assumption that his defense is absolutely awful. 4 games in, I think we can say that is unequivocally true. I also think it explains some of his aggressiveness on fourth down against Kentucky. While I still think some of those decisions were questionable, it makes a lot more sense in the shadow of the past 2 games for the Gators defense. Florida faced 9 Tennessee drives in the game, and the Volunteers averaged 7.9 plays per drive, along with 63.7 yards per drive. Florida stopped the Vols twice with fumbles after they had driven down the field, but other than that, it was a real struggle. This isn't a new trend. In Florida's first 4 games this year, opponents' drives have averaged 7.2 plays per drive and 40.8 yards per drive. That means that Florida's offense is sitting on the sideline a lot and then forced to respond continuously after the defense gives up whatever advantage was just gained. But the question is, why is the defense so bad? Well, as usual, when things are this bad, it's a combination of a bunch of things. The first thing that jumps out on film is not executing the scheme correctly. You can see that on this play as Florida has 3 men covering 2 at the top of the screen, and the same thing at the bottom when the defensive end drops into coverage. But that means it's a linebacker's responsibility, in this case, Shamar James, number 6, to cover the running back out of the backfield. But James doesn't move when the back motions out into the flat. That leaves only Rashard Torrance, number 22, as the only man free to tackle the running back. But Torrance started the play 20 yards downfield. It wasn't just James who made this mistake. Later, the exact same thing was screwed up by way more experienced players. This was an absolute killer because Tennessee had just gotten a holding call on a hooker touchdown run that backed them up and made it look like Florida might get a stop. I'm not sure whether this is Jason Marshall's, number 3, or Amari Burney's, number 2's, fault. I'm inclined to think it's Burney because of the way Marshall plays outside leverage, but he's either supposed to pass off the Tennessee wide receiver to Burney and take the running back in the flat, or Burney is supposed to take the running back in the flat on what's essentially a wheel route. Instead, they both take the receiver, and it's an easy touchdown pass for Hendon Hooker to his running back. This is exactly what happened on the other back-breaking play that happened right after the Anthony Richardson fumble. It's unclear to me on this play who's at fault. I'm sure Trey Dean, number 0, will get plenty of criticism for this one because of the one that was so clearly his fault earlier. But I can't be sure here. If Tony called man coverage, the tight end would be Dean's man. But that clearly isn't the case because the linebackers drop into a zone at the snap. If Tony called quarters coverage, the outside linebacker, in this case Dean, would take the wheel. But if Tony called cover 3, then the corner has responsibility for the deep outside third. Regardless, you can see that at the point where I paused the play, Florida has 4 defenders guarding the post and nobody out on the tight end running the wheel. Somebody screwed this up. And then, of course, we have this debacle. I have no idea what Trey Dean's doing here. He's responsible for the inside receiver. There isn't anyone else on that side who could be. Maybe if we're being really generous, we could say he's expecting safety help, but that's weird because Rashad Torrance, number 22, is on the other side of the field. Regardless, there's nothing but green grass behind Dean, and when the receiver runs there, nobody in Gator colors ran over there to cover him. This is an unacceptable bust. Not only had Florida just worked really hard to go up 7-3, but to give up this kind of yardage because one person didn't know what the play call was has to be disheartening. The second thing that's happening is that the defense, or that's hampering the defense, is the play calling. Napier's going to get criticism for calling a timeout with 90 seconds left in the first half, trying to get Tennessee to punt. But it really was the defensive call after Tennessee got the first down that flummoxed me. Tennessee was left with a 1st and 10 with 85 seconds left at its own 22. The only way they score more than 3 points is if the Gators defense gives up a big play. So why is Rashad Torrance creeping up towards the line of scrimmage before the snap? It's a dead giveaway to Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker that he will have one-on-one coverage to that side, the perfect condition to take a deep shot. Hooker takes the shot. Jason Marshall gets beat on a fantastic catch by Tennessee. But why is Florida blitzing in this situation rather than making Tennessee throw underneath and use clock? Okay, so maybe you'd excuse the Gators for being aggressive. That's just who they are, and so they're going to go down blitzing regardless of the down and situation. Well, then why did they run this play two plays later? The two circles show that Florida has 3 men covering 2 receivers on each side of the field. With Ventrell Miller also going into coverage, that means the Gators have 7 defenders dropping into coverage. But they didn't drop into zone coverage. This is zone deep with man coverage underneath, the perfect condition to give a running quarterback open running lanes. This will prevent a deep shot, and you'd hope your defensive line would keep Hooker contained. I'm just confused why this coverage is called here and not 2 plays earlier as well. Let him run for 18 yards from his own 22, and you're looking at Tennessee having to scramble to get into field goal range. Let him run for 18 yards from his own 20, and you're looking at Tennessee having multiple shots into the end zone to end the half. The third issue is that even when the scheme is called well and understood, Florida's defenders don't end up in the right position. Amari Burney actually played this pretty well, and it certainly looked cool when he tossed the running back out of the way coming to block him. But Hooker had time to make this throw. The only reason he didn't is that Florida dropped a defensive lineman circled right into the path of where he wanted to go with the ball. Once he double clutched, Burney was able to get home. But the linebackers weren't able to get home very often when they blitzed. On this play, both Burney and Ventrell Miller blitz. But without dropping anyone else into coverage, this leaves Trevez Johnson isolated in one-on-one coverage. When the blitz can't get home, Johnson gets beaten for a big gain. This isn't all on the linebackers, but you can't blitz 2 guys and not have one come free. Instead, Miller gets caught up in traffic, and Hooker has plenty of time to deliver the ball. And then there are plays where Florida turns short gains into long ones. On this play, Florida drops linebacker Shamar James, number 6 circled, into the middle of the field, acting a little bit like a spy on Hooker. Hooker somehow escapes the pocket, but the Gators have him bottled up for maybe a 10-yard gain. There are 3 defenders coming from the inside, and Trevez Johnson, number 16, ready to force him back inside. But Johnson cuts inside his blocker rather than taking on the blocker. That allows Hooker to cut to the outside and the blocker to get in the way of James, who would come over to make the tackle. Ventrell Miller has to come completely across the field to make the tackle, all because Johnson didn't force Hooker back inside. The result of all of this is that Florida's defense almost always looks out of place or ill-prepared. Some of that is youth, some of it is scheme, some of it is understanding, and some of it is just toughness and physically making a play. Hendon Hooker is good, but a quarterback rating of 206.8 and a yards above replacement, YAR, my proprietary stat for measuring a QB's performance both running and throwing the ball, of 5.00 is ridiculous. That's Michael Vick level. There's no way for the Gators offense to keep up. Florida's offense. The Gators offense was excellent in this game. It wasn't perfect, and so wasn't able to win the game. But when you put up 594 yards, 6.8 yards per play, and 8 20-plus yard plays, you should win the game. The Richardson fumble was a killer, but only because this game felt exactly like the LSU game last year, where Anthony Richardson led the Gators up and down the field only to go to the sideline and watch his defense piss away all of his hard work almost immediately. Tennessee's defense proved that its early numbers against the run don't seem to be a fluke, holding the Gators to 42 carries for 141 yards and Gators backs to 79 yards on 25 carries, 3.2 yards per rush. What they couldn't do was contain Anthony Richardson, who roared back in this game with a vengeance after 2 horrible performances against Kentucky and USF. There will be much made of his 17 rushes, but I think more should be made of his 69% usage rate. Richardson was the entire offense, and he nearly delivered despite limited help from his teammates. So what changed? Well, I think we can explain that with two of his shorter throws. This play came just a few plays before the laser to Keon Zipper for a touchdown, but was critical to keeping the drive going. It's a 3rd and 6, and Tennessee brought a zone blitz. Their outside linebacker, you can see with the arrow, rushes, while the middle linebacker and other outside linebacker drop into coverage. Richardson reads it perfectly and delivers the ball to Dante Zanders in the space vacated by the blitzing linebacker. The other play that jumped out to me is this one. Tennessee rushes 3 linemen and have a spy for Richardson. There are only 52 seconds left, so it would make sense if Richardson tried to drive the ball down the field. But instead, he finds his check down and gets the ball out. I would have liked to see Chiakau Bowman get out of bounds and save a couple of seconds, but sometimes you have to take a 10-yard gain when the defense gives it to you. Richardson wasn't willing to do that against Kentucky or USF, so the fact that he was willing to do it against Tennessee late is a sign of significant progress. Even though he threw for 453 yards, Richardson's QB rating of 151 is good, but not great. He still struggles with accuracy, 55%, but his ability to hit explosive plays in the passing game and supplement that as a threat on the ground means that his YAR for the game was 2.00, which is borderline Heisman level. Had you told me we were getting Heisman level AR, I would have said Florida could hang with the Vols. That's what we got. Takeaway. I'm encouraged by two things in this game. First, Anthony Richardson looked like the quarterback that we saw last season in flashes. We knew there might be some growing pains, and this was definitely a high ceiling performance for AR. But what that also means is that we've had 2 good and 2 bad performances from Richardson. His season QB rating of 111.7 is poor. His season YAR of 0.04 means that he's been average. This Florida team isn't going anywhere significant with an average Anthony Richardson. He maybe doesn't need to be this special every game, but the ups and downs of the roller coaster he's had us on to start the season need to level out a little bit. But he was much more consistent against Tennessee on the throws he should complete. Multiple times there were opportunities where his throws would have flown right over his receivers the past 2 games, and instead he put it right there. Whether that's been because of health or trying not to run or something else, the fact that he was on the money tonight says he can do it. Now he just has to do it every time. I'm also encouraged by Billy Napier. He clearly went into this game with a game plan, and he stuck to his guns throughout. Some of that meant taking chances on 4th downs that raised some eyebrows. Some of that meant going for 2 points where it wasn't intuitive to do so. Some of that meant running Richardson and risking injury because that's what was necessary to win the game. But even if he'd come into Knoxville with a conservative game plan, his decision to stick with what he believed in should please all Gator fans. Dan Mullen could draw up an offensive game plan with ease. What he couldn't do is stick to a process for building a program. This is just one game for Napier, but given his reputation as a program builder, this gives some insight into how he makes decisions. I am a fan. But good grief, it is depressing to watch this defense. I spent 2 hours collecting clips after the game to show and left a bunch on the cutting room floor because they just reinforced points I had already made. Sure, there isn't enough talent on that side of the ball, but sometimes getting off the field requires somebody to make an extraordinary effort. We saw that when Ventrell Miller punched the ball out on Tennessee's opening drive, but those sorts of plays have been few and far between. The Gators have been especially bad on 3rd down, having allowed 52% of 3rd downs to be converted in the first 4 games. 61.5% versus Utah, 30.8% versus Kentucky, 53.3% versus South Florida, and 66.7% versus Tennessee. That just isn't good enough, no matter what players you have on the field. So that comes back to Napier and Patrick Toney. In his post-game press conference, Napier said he suspected that when he looked at the film, he thought there'd be 12 to 15 plays where Florida beat Florida. Those are going to have to stop, and we're going to have to see this defense making progress or the young guys getting more playing time. Because Florida has showed it can hold an opponent in check to win versus Kentucky. They've also shown that they can play efficiently on offense versus Tennessee. What they haven't been able to show is they can put those sorts of performances together in the same game. Those are the positives to take out of this game. But those positives are all just moral victories at this point. And as Napier said during his press conference, there aren't any moral victories in the SEC. Well, thanks so much for joining me here. Hopefully you enjoyed the article, even though it's obviously a little bit of a depressing topic here. It's great that we have Anthony Richardson back, that Anthony Richardson seems to have regained some of his confidence, whether that's because he's on the road, whether it's because he's a Gainesville native and playing in the swamp is more pressure than being on the road, whether he enjoys the fact that he's got the fans coming at him, or whether it was just his time to step up and really show what he can do. He was able to do it. And it was pretty clear after the first quarter that the Anthony Richardson that we thought we were getting coming into the season was back, at least in this game against Tennessee. Now we get to see, right? We get to see whether that sustains. We get to see whether that ends up being the way he plays the rest of the year. And, I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago comparing him to Joe Burrow back in 2018. And Burrow struggled for like the first 9 games of the year, very inconsistent. And then the last 4, everything clicked. And I think that's really what we're hoping to see from Florida, not just with the quarterback, but also on the defensive side of the ball. Now, that doesn't mean you might need to make some changes, right? I mean, Kamari Wilson and Devin Moore and some of those younger guys, McClellan up front, some of those younger guys are going to have to get some snaps, and you want them to get snaps because you're not really playing for 2021 at this point, other than making a bowl game, and for the leadership that the older guys have provided, and the fact that they should get to go to a bowl game if they want to. But you're not really playing for 2021 other than those things. You're playing for 2020 for 2022. You're playing for 2023, because if Anthony Richardson can come out and play like this in every game next year, and if the defense can improve just marginally, it doesn't need to improve to be a world beater. It just needs to improve to be able to get off the field 2 or 3 times a game, not just turnover related, right? Actually force a punt. Then the 2023 team has a real opportunity to be good, especially if Napier can supplement the talent on the team with some of the guys he's going to bring in this 2023 recruiting class. I don't think it's perfect. I mean, everything's going to have to hit perfectly next year for Florida to be truly competitive in the SEC. I think we're seeing that there are a lot of holes, and those holes are going to have to be filled over time. But you don't get that much time in the SEC. You're going to have to turn it around. And one of the things you need is an elite quarterback. And it looks like Florida might be on the track to having that again. Now, look, Richardson has to keep it up. Napier has to stick to his guns. It's easy to make those calls once. The question is, once you've defended them, will you make them again? And the thing is even though Florida was an underdog, and so raising the winning percentage by going for it on 4th down makes a lot of sense, you need to do that even when you're the favorite, because going forward on 4th down, the math doesn't change that much, whether you're the favorite or whether you're the underdog. It changes a little bit, but not that much, which means we should expect to see Napier have this same level of aggressiveness moving forward against teams where maybe Florida is more evenly matched than Tennessee. Because remember, Florida was a 10.5-point underdog coming into this one. And so it's not just, this isn't something where people and experts, and I mean, I looked at the stats and I said, I can't pick Florida to cover. I think Tennessee just dominates them on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And then Florida was able to get enough offensive muster going to make it close. But again, if you're throwing a Hail Mary at the end of the game, then you don't really, you're still a ways away from getting to where you want to be. And Tennessee now has that slate in the SEC East. And, a lot of people pick Florida to finish 4th. I wasn't one of them. I thought the Gators would be a little bit better this year. But, now that's kind of what you're playing for. You're playing to be in front of Missouri and South Carolina and Vanderbilt and those teams. And I think Florida will be able to do that. But obviously, they're going to have to keep improving, because those teams are going to improve as well. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us here. Again, if you want to read this article, you can find it over at www.readandreaction.com. The articles tend to come out before the audio versions. And so if you sign up over there on Read and Reaction, it's free to subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get an email that tells you when new stuff comes out on the site. The other thing is, if you'd like and subscribe here on YouTube, that helps us out. Please do that. It doesn't cost you anything. Lets you know when these things post. And then also, if you really like what we do, you want to support us, you want to see more of it, you can go over to patreon.com/readandreaction and support us there. So thanks so much. Appreciate everybody supporting us. Got a sort of not a bye week, but a little bit of an off week with Eastern Washington coming up. We'll have some content on the site though. Probably some more insights into what Florida needs to improve, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where we think maybe some personnel changes or just changes in scheme would make a difference. But until then, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Go Gators.